Good afternoon and welcome to Community Development Block Grant Commission meeting of October 14th, 2011. I would like to start by remembering someone, a good friend whom we lost yesterday, and that's Mr. Larry Zarian. He was a strong supporter of this community, a friend, a mentor. He had a passion to help, a big heart, and he's going to be sorely missed. Our condolences to his family, his 3 children, Vincent, Gregory, and Lawrence. And we're going to remember Larry in our thoughts, in our words, and in our deeds. So rest in peace, Larry. Thank you.
Item 1A, roll call. Committee members Cornell?
Yes.
Oganessian is absent. Olivares? Sinanian is absent. And Chair Markarian?
Yes.
1B, report of recording secretary regarding posting of agenda. The agenda for the October 14, 2011 meeting of the CDBG Advisory Committee was posted on Monday, October 10, 2011 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Item 2, minutes. 2A, approval of the minutes of the July 27, 2011 and September 8, 2011 CDBG Advisory Committee meetings.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the minutes as submitted by the recording secretary. On the September 8th minutes, I do have one minor correction that I would like to note, and that's on 3B. At the end, it should be the YMCA, and it looks like a typo area there. And with that, amendment, I'd like to move that we accept those minutes of July 27th, September 8th, as submitted by the recording secretary.
Committee members Cornell?
Yes.
Oganessian is absent. Olivares?
Yes.
Sinanian is absent. Chair Markarian?
Yes. Next item.
Item 3, staff or committee comments.
Any comments?
I do have a comment. Actually, a reminder for next Wednesday, October 19th at 1 p.m. is the next scheduled site visits to the social service agencies. So I will be sending out a reminder message as well and requesting confirmation of attendance. And we'll be meeting at the Parks Administration office at 12:30 p.m. for those who would like to carpool. And also, as you may recall, the October 5th site visits were canceled, and we're looking at October 26th as a possible date to reschedule with the agencies if the majority is available. So,
I'm sorry, what was the second date?
I'm sorry?
The second date was the reschedule.
October 26th for the site visits that
It's also
were canceled.
Wednesday, right?
It's also
Okay.
Wednesday, yes.
We have 2 site visits left.
Exactly.
Let me just say that I'm aware of the next Wednesday. I might have a conflict where I might meet you late or halfway through. So I just want to let you know that ahead of time.
Okay. And then the October 26th date, does that sound?
That sounds okay. I just need to check my schedule. But
Okay,
it
so I'll
should be
send out
fine.
an email about that, but just to keep it fresh in your minds. Thank you.
So I just wanted a clarification. We are scheduled for next Wednesday then?
That's correct.
Correct. And then for the rescheduled one you just mentioned then?
The Wednesday after, so 2 Wednesdays in a row.
Fine.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Next item.
Okay, next item is item 4. That's action items. Under 4A, we have a review and approve fiscal year 2012-2013 CDBG program priorities.
Had a chance to review the estimated numbers for 2012 and 13, and I'm sure if you had a chance to see it, we have a 10% decrease from last year, correct?
I believe you're looking at the report for the next
Yes.
item. Right now, we're looking at the program priorities.
Oh, okay.
Are we on 4A?
4A.
4A?
4A.
Do we have a report, Mr. Correa?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'll be brief on our report for the the 2011-12 needs assessment for the 2012 fiscal year, and this is where we begin doing some community meetings and community outreach, survey work, and getting a feeling of what the community needs are, and that way we can develop our program priorities for the next fiscal year. We do have a 5-year consolidated plan, which is our 5-year program plan, and there are priorities there that the committee has reviewed and approved. So by and large, we use that as the base, and then we go back in the community and then develop some more, if there's significant changes or more specific details, we'll add those to the program priorities. So I'm going to go real brief on what we did this year. We actually did several things. We did a public hearing, which I believe Mr. Cornell was present at this meeting on September 22nd at Mann Elementary School. We had about 48 participants there. It was a very good event for us, and I think we really did get a lot of feedback on that. And if you look at Table 1, which is the spreadsheet that would show the actual comments from the residents, what they were, and we broke it up into 3 different groups between those who speak primarily Spanish, those who speak English, and those who speak Armenian. And by and large, we kind of saw the same needs. Again, come up with youth programs, come up with employment and training programs, job counseling. What we found a little bit different was the need for some additional programs at the parks to help with the perceived needs for drug and crime prevention. It appears that residents were feeling that there was a bit more drug activity, more youth, not having anything to do at the parks. We do note that there are certainly some programs that have been cut back, but by and large, there are activities at the parks. It's just the kids are hanging out there, and the parents want to make sure that there's programs, but also that drug education and other deterrents like lighting, cameras that will prevent a lot of any type of youth crime issues. So we kind of saw that through all the groups. It just wasn't one group. I know Mr. Cornell was present. He heard a few some feedback on that. So that was something detailed as far as what we could implement this year. They did talk about housing and the need for affordable housing, the need for, of course, job training for youth and adults. So by and large, it's pretty much the same as we've seen in the past years, except again at the local parks is where we see kids congregating more so. But that was the actual public comments. On Table 2, we actually did a survey as well, so we got feedback from residents on a survey, in a written survey that was handed out. We collected about 183 of those surveys, and you can see where some of the, I won't say priorities, but some of the needs were coming out, and there were, for again, a lot of social services such as employment services, child care, crime and public safety, homeless services. So a lot of it was very similar to what was said at the public hearings. I do know, again, that crime prevention programs does, again, seem to be very high need, but other programs as well. So we didn't see a significant change in this. The other part was the community facilities. There was a high need for the health centers and youth centers. That seemed to be an issue as far as having a need for local community-based health programs and health services. So that's certainly continues to be a high need. We also looked at what neighborhood improvements were needed in the community, and again, by and large, it's continued to have beautification programs, trash and debris removal, graffiti removal. So a lot of, again, those kind of programs that keeps Glendale the way it is, beautiful, and continue to be responsive to the needs of the community. But by and large, it was pretty much the same as previous years as far as what we saw, except for some detailed information on the parks and the need for some additional public safety programs and some crime prevention deterrent programs, again, like lighting, cameras, and so on. So we didn't see any significant changes, so staff is recommending that we keep the program priorities pretty much the same as they have been in the past, and that would be part of our request for proposal when we get proposals from the agencies to have programs that follow these priorities, and also the other type of neighborhood improvement programs. So by and large, it did seem any significant changes this year on the priorities. The priorities are listed in that summary on that last page, on page 3. You can see the summary of the program priorities for the social services and the neighborhood improvements, housing and homeless as well. So,
I mean, is transportation assistance something new this year? I don't remember seeing this last year.
and I'm sorry, Madam Chair, in the survey, or
Yes, in the survey, it says under social services, I see transportation assistance. Is this more for seniors, or?
I believe it's probably more for
for
seniors.
seniors?
Again, V-Line, the metro, the needs for the community to move around, especially as people are having to use more public transportation. But yes, that is coming up.
I see health centers, probably here is the free health clinics.
Yes.
Those are probably very much in need nowadays. All right. Good, great, thank you.
We do need a
Excellent.
motion that I think is attached to approve
Yeah,
the
we do
program
need to make-
priorities, and so there's a motion in your packet.
I'll be happy to make one. I just had an assessment myself here, having attended this. I think that was about the far best attendance since I've been attending them that we had in attendance that night at Mann. I was very happy to see it. Shows the good work, coordination, communication with GUSD, the parents, and so on, to get this kind of response. And I'm elated that each time that I'm there, that we have more attendance there, because the more attendance gives them an opportunity to see and gather and tell their friends what's being done, number one, and number two, the various needs that our Community Parks Division is doing, and the services that we provide. So I'm happy to see that with our prior priorities of past years, that this fits right in the ballpark of being consistent with our priorities that we have prioritized over the years. And I'm happy to see we're in the ballpark on that. So I'm just happy to see the good job. Continue it. And I'll be happy, Madam Chair, to make the motion.
I have one question for staff, Mr. Carrillo.
Sure.
Once we review the application, reviews with the staff, do we compare it with the needs and the comments and the requests that we have from the community, and see if we're kind of meeting the needs for every different aspects? I mean, I would like to see like a variety of application, kind of comparing to what the needs are. And definitely, we don't want to see 4 organizations coming forward for crime prevention program, but then we're lacking, other applicants from different requests and different need. So is there a way that we can balance that, make sure that we have from the entire spectrum, we're covering, different needs, just not one specific? And maybe we can encourage some of these organizations who are providing services for the other parts and the other types of issues to come forward, and so we can also help.
Yeah, Madam Chair, members of the committee, yes, certainly we can encourage when we do our RFP and when we do our technical assistance to let them know that we can provide them with some of the notes that we have, and encourage agencies that are broad-based or specific with certain areas such as crime prevention and youth or seniors to apply. We don't always know who's out there and who's going to come in and apply. They may all apply for youth, or again, we do have a balance pretty much every year,
Right.
and it's really depending what the nonprofits that are available to apply. But we can certainly encourage a broad-based plan to cover all the the needs. We won't get them all, but again, to
Sure.
cover some of the priority needs that have been brought up, especially
Yeah, we just
this
don't want
year.
the concentration to be on one service and lack on the other. So if we can keep a balance, and I'm sure it's been like that way, but moving forward, we'd like to keep that balance. All right, ready for a motion?
Mr. Carrillo, just one last item here. On this demographic indicators for the 5-year plan, is this information passed on to the council members?
Mr. Cornell, it's not necessarily passed on to them. It's part of our plan that was developed with the 5-year consolidated plan, and it's something that is provided as far as background information. Some of it is provided in the staff report, but not necessarily provided to them directly.
Okay, fine. Madam Chair, I move on item 4A that we approve as submitted by staff for the fiscal year of 2012 and 2013, the CDBG program priorities.
Second.
Committee members Cornell,
Yes.
Oganessian is absent, Olivares,
Yes.
Sinanian is absent, Chair Markarian.
Yes. Next item?
Item 4B, review and approve preliminary fiscal year 2012-2013 CDBG funding allocation plan by funding category.
Okay. So we do have the preliminary allocation plan. And again, as I'm looking at these two years, we're looking at a 10% decrease in funds for the upcoming year. Any questions on that? Any concerns?
Just one. I think what you normally do is you project the percentages to the next year and use that as the plan, correct? So, and we're trying to build in some reduction because we've been getting them consistently over the years. Is that correct? That's it.
All right, so public social services, I think 408 is the estimated. And we're looking at capital neighborhood improvement projects, $1,800,000. Pre-designated, we have $1,669,000. And undesignated for capital improvement is $210,000. And Mr. Correa, I think you were mentioning something about the Section 108 loan repayment. If you would like to elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Let me just kind of give you a little bit of overall picture of the funding plan and how we derive some of these figures. As the Chair mentioned, we are projecting between a 10%, and I hate to say this, but it could be 15%, 20% cut in CDBG, or it could be less. There's really no, the latitude is so great on what may or may not come in. We just are picking a middle spot of 10% right now. So the numbers could fluctuate up or down for this year. Unfortunately, last year we know we got a 17% cut, and we were only expecting 6-7%. So it really dependent on the budget and the funding that we have. But the difference really is the 10% and also some projects that last year were closed and canceled. Several New Horizon projects, the YWCA projects, several of them were canceled and reprogrammed. We don't have that this year. We're not canceling any projects or any programs this year. The money that's being rolled over, shall we say, is just from projects that didn't spend all their money. Certain capital projects don't spend 100%. They may have a few thousand here and there. So adding it all up is where we'll see the $98,000. The $46,000 you see on your sheet is from one of the New Horizons programs that was one of their buildings that was sold, and that money came back to the city as far as what our loan amount was. So that came back, and that's part of the $46,000. But overall, we do have from $446,000 to $408,000 a significant cut, and that certainly is going to be a challenge for the committee to see how we would handle that. But beyond that, there is the capital projects, which right now we're estimating about $1.8 million, which is from $2.3 million is certainly a significant amount of money as well. So we have to look at as far as what some of the priorities are definitely on those programs. The City Council has always pre-designated projects. We're continuing those projects as pre-designated. We're not adding any new projects, programs, because certainly the funding is not there, but the big priority certainly is the code enforcement program, the 2 loans, which we do have to pay, and those are mandatory payments, and the park project, which right now is here for Palmer Park. And again, we're not adding any new projects, programs, certainly because you can see the significance in the dollar amount there. We are estimating about $210,000 for the community. That's certainly a drop from the $300,000 from last year. What we're looking at, though, is possibly is that from that $240,000 you'll see for Path Achieve for their new emergency shelter access center, which is now Ascensia, which is now their new name, is that our loan may be deferred as far as the principal amount for the loan until next year, fiscal year 2012-13, because of the loan being approved so late that we would only pay interest. We pay interest every 6 months, and then we pay principal and interest another 6 months. So we're looking at hopefully some savings, about $175,000 that we could move over to the categories of pre-designated or I believe the undesignated
Capital
project
improvement.
as well that would help the community with some of those projects. So we don't have an exact figure until the loan is closed on November the 12th, and we know what our interest payment is going to be in February of 2012. But right now, it doesn't appear that we'll be spending all the money that we had budgeted for, mainly because HUD has been taking a while to get to get the loans approved on the market. So.
But the decision whether we're going to reallocate that to undesignated project would be something that we have to decide probably after November, you said.
Well, Madam Chair, you can make a recommendation that if staff has, if staff sees that the funding is going to be available, instead of putting that money into somewhere else, that it would be used for the undesignated projects as far as the RFP goes. And we'll know more in November. Again, we're going to City Council November the 15th, I believe, and that would be certainly our report too, is when we know more information of how much we're going to have from that loan payment. But during the recommendation,
I would like to recommend that, because looking at the undesignated project dollar amount, from 2012, 11-12 to 12-13, there is a big difference. There's a big gap deficit. We're looking at $100,000+ drop for capital improvement funding. So I would like to make a recommendation that if that fund becomes available, then to reallocate that towards undesignated projects, capital improvements.
Yeah, I'd like to go with the chair, because on this, we're not going to have another meeting until we start our funding process, and I don't believe that's until February. So this is the last meeting until that time. So we would have to put that provision in at this time in order for that to be a valid proposition.
Do we have that recommendation? Sorry.
When is our next meeting expected to be?
It will be in February 2012.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
I have a couple of comments. One, I wanted to just a couple of statements. When we see the reduction on public social services from 446 to 408, that's not truly a reduction, because the 408 actually reflects funds that came back in of 46,000 from New Horizons and the 98,000 unappropriated. So in reality, the cut is a lot bigger. It's just that on the surface, it doesn't seem like it's that large.
Yeah, because we did have that 46.
Yeah, we have some money coming back that from previous years. So I just want to make sure that when people look at these numbers, it's actually a lot more serious than it appears to be here.
Right.
With that, when we look at the reduction in funding that we're now getting almost every year, and we look at the pre-designated projects that the city has, these amounts, for example, code enforcement, the turf project is not factoring in this year. I know the loan repayments Those are fixed, because that's a previous agreement, so those cannot change. But every other pre-designated project that the city has an amount attached to it. And then every year we're getting less and less money. Those numbers are not getting affected with any reduction, while all of the private sector that comes in, they're getting hit with a reduction. So we got to think about making this equitable in terms of reductions to city projects as well as everybody else that's getting hit with these numbers. Because what's happened here, and I don't think it's intentional in any way, but numbers have been fixed. Code enforcement, $420,000, and that's going to continue on. And as the money starts getting reduced, code enforcement is not getting reduced. And I'm not suggesting that we do that, but somehow we need to be fair across the board here. And so as we embark into next year, I'm just suggesting we need to have discussions a little bit more towards that end.
But there is a reduction actually in the estimation for pre-designated. I'm looking at it, what, $300,000?
Yeah, on the overall.
Overall, yes, overall. I think
the main difference on this particular one was because the turf project was taken out.
yeah.
Mr. Carrillo, what Mr. Oliveras was saying, and this dialogue goes back a while, since we've both been on this body for a while, that we've been going back and forth on this. And I remember there was a resolution, if not a resolution, a request by this body that be presented to the council when making up on these designated projects, that we know we have no qualms that the council has their priority in this. They should have their fingers in the pie. They're the ones on the hot seat. They're the ones that are accountable. We're appointees. We won't. But I'd like to see if there is more of a team effort between us and the council. And I know, I believe in the past this was brought up, and I'm not sure if this was presented to the council, this concept. If it was, we didn't get any feedback, but perhaps you can bring us up to date on this then, about this working with the council on these pre-designated projects.
Mr. I'm not really sure I understand the question, but the council does every year review, and at least twice a year, review the CDBG plan. Again, in November, when they look at the program priorities, they review some of what's pre-designated. This year, back in I believe in May, we did go back to council when we did our report for approval of the plan from last year, and there was a report that was made that talked about pre-designated projects, and these are primarily park projects, where they actually did want to make sure that these projects were pre-designated and used, and they asked us to prioritize what were the projects, at least for parks, that we were going to utilize CDBG funds. So, but I'm not sure I understood the question per se as far as...
If I can, let me interject it here, because I think I know what we're all trying, well, at least the two of us are trying to say, is you're going to go in November with this particular report that we're going to approve or disapprove or recommend with some changes today. And one of the things we're obviously talking about here is, since there is a reduction across the board, then maybe it should truly be across the board, including the pre-designated projects. When the council gets the report from staff, they have a report that has these numbers, and so they react to these numbers. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Cornell, I think what you're voicing, and I would agree if that's the case, is that there should be some presentation to the council that says the committee would like you to consider a reduction across the board for pre-designated projects so that it is fair across the board.
Yes.
Am I correct in that interpretation? And that's what I would certainly go in that direction. Yeah.
And Mr. Correa, looking at this estimation, I'm trying to figure out where this 1,669 estimation came from. I'm looking at the numbers, pre-designated projects totaling 756,000 because the 970 is not estimated this year. It's a zero here for the turf project. So why do we have 1669 if what we're looking at is only 756?
Madam Chair, if you look at the figures, it's 420, 248, 245, and 756. Does that?
So 756 is a project for the park. Is this some? Okay, so this is something we didn't have last year.
No, Madam Chair, just again, every year the city designates
Right,
about $1
different.
million in CDBG funds. There is, we did take a cut from our allocation to 756 as a result of reduced funding. Code enforcement is a little trickier because this year there are anticipation that there may be cutbacks from the state on code enforcement. And so code enforcement we don't cover the full cost of code enforcement. It's generally certainly 1.7, 1.8 million. But we certainly cover a significant part of it, and a lot of it is for Southern Glendale. And given the fact that there are perceived cutbacks in the code enforcement program, we do anticipate keeping the same level, even though I know the other programs, projects are cut back. But to keep the same level of code enforcement, which is certainly a priority for the council, that's what we want to keep right now. Because lessening code enforcement is certainly an impact to the community, and it's going to be a challenge for code enforcement with cutbacks from the state as well.
Well, the pre-designated is less than what was estimated for last year, so it's a few $100,000 less.
Who handles our code enforcement? Is it done by within the department or by neighborhood services?
Mr. Cornell, Neighborhood Services.
Right. Okay.
you said.
But anyway, I think that if we're ready to make a motion, I would make a motion to accept this with the additional language that suggests to the council that a reduction in the pre-designated projects, the ones that can be reduced, besides the 108 loans, be considered.
I'll second.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask for clarification. I did understand your motion now. Previously, you had also mentioned, or the committee had also mentioned, about possibly reprogramming any Section 108 loan repayment funds that were made
Back
available.
to the public social, back
And
to the project capital improvement.
Can we do that? I mean, that actually has not happened yet.
Yeah.
Or do we have to wait until it actually we know it takes place before we make a recommendation?
You can make a recommendation directing staff. You can direct staff
Okay.
that any funds budgeted for the Section 108 loan
Be reallocated
to PAC.
back into.
Yes.
Okay. Then I would definitely add that to the motion.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll take roll call. Committee members: Cornell,
Yes.
Oganessian is absent. Olivares,
Yes.
Sinanian is absent. Chair Markarian.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Next item, please.
Item 4C, review and approve a request for funding proposal RFP and CDBG funding application.
Mr. Correa, would you tell us about the pre-qualification and application process briefly for our viewers? And the deadline to submit application, the criteria, and what's needed to be qualified?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, we did provide you a draft of the proposed public social services and the capital improvement RFPs, and including the application. And as the chair mentioned, we do have some changes to the requirements for submitting RFPs, and would be good for the agencies and the public to know what some of these are. Generally, the proposal has stayed the same. We certainly do see a reduction in funding, so we'll have more specifics, I'm we hope we have some specifics at the time it's released, which will be November 18th. But at this time, we're going with the estimated 10% reduction in social service funds, and I'll talk about that one first. But in order to be pre-qualified, the council and the committee has certainly looked at what's required to be a successful CDBG project, and we do have agencies that certainly meet these requirements. So a lot of it's for any new agency that would be applying for CDBG funds. The first one is any agency applying would need to have 2 years of financial statements submitted with their application. In other words, I would say 2010 and 2009 financial statements. These are certified by CPAs. These will not be something that is drafted by an accountant per se, or a bookkeeper, or the in-house accountant. It would have to be a certified financial statement for 2 years, or an audit, or a compilation. And compilation is written and done by a certified CPA. So a lot of agencies will need to understand this, especially the new agencies, and develop their financial capacity to meet these requirements, or learn how it's done so that next year they can apply. But that is certainly a recommendation and something that's been approved by the City Council for any agency that would apply for CDBG funds. They have to have this 2 years. By and large, our existing agencies do meet those requirements. We certainly are looking at the newer agencies so they understand what's required for CDBG, and certainly the smaller agencies that are don't do audits in general would have to do their audits, and they can go back. An agency can go back now and do an audit for a previous year. That wouldn't prohibit them from applying if they have the audits done by the December 22nd deadline. The other requirement is that we would have the applicants certify their payment of payroll taxes, and certainly that would be something we would look at, making sure that their quarterly payroll taxes are paid and their state taxes are paid, so that we know that there's not any issues with IRS or the state Economic Development Department as far as any payroll taxes. We're also asking for applicants to submit copies of their board meeting, so that the board meeting would show that the board has reviewed the financial statements and approved of them, so that there's certainly a review process, control system, so that agencies and their boards know what's going on as far as their agency goes in the finances. So again, this helps agencies strengthen up their financial systems and makes the CDBG process transparent, so that agencies certainly have opportunity to make these deadlines and have the board review their financial statements. But again, it may eliminate those agencies that don't have very tight controls for CDBG and may get in trouble later on with any type of disbursement of federal funds, and they're not meeting the audit requirements. So certainly we've tightened up a little bit on the application process, and a lot of this is in the RFP, which you've seen, you get a chance to see. But again, we'll work with the agencies that are new, and certainly existing agencies, notifying them of these requirements.
Sure.
And the sooner they read this, the better, because it is all new.
So regardless of the amount that they're requesting, they need to meet the requirements.
Correct, Madam Chair. Regardless of they're applying for $5,000 or $100,000, they all need to meet this minimum requirement of 2 years of financial statements.
How about the scope of, remember, we've had incidents where the agencies changed the scope of their work, and they came back requesting the funds to be allocated for something completely different. So is there a language there that talks about redoing the entire application so that there would be a completely different process, so this automatically, whatever fund was approved automatically cannot be allocated to another project. It needs to stay within that project. And if they decide to change the scope along the way, then this is a completely new ballgame.
Well, I think on that, because this has come up
Yeah,
recently.
this has come up that we just need to.
And I don't think we've given staff any direction yet as to whether to even include any language in here, and I don't recall seeing it in this particular package, which tells me that we ought to probably take this up at some point as an agenda item. And I think that may have been suggested by, I think, Mr. Marion at some point, and have a discussion about whether we want to include that kind of language and tighten up the whole process a little bit. So, but I think it's within us here at some point to make that decision. But you can clearly, at least at this point, see the concern and express it to anybody who is willing to apply as of this point. I did have a question because of tightening up, and I'm completely in agreement with what's being suggested. But when you receive as part of a packet the minutes of a board meeting, as it relates to the issue of financial statements, what are you specifically at the staff level going to be looking for?
Mr. Olivares, members of the committee, Madam Chair, we're looking at some type of letter, some type of statement, and that's, again, in your application, that would certify that the board minutes reflect a motion to approve the financial statements. So certainly, maybe some haven't done that yet, but they'll certainly have time to do it and get the board together and say this is a requirement for one of the CDBG applications. There are other agencies that require a board motion to even apply for funds. Certain agencies will require a motion by the board allowing them to apply for CDBG funds. We're not doing that, but I've seen that before, and the grant person would receive a letter or a copy of board minutes. So we will want to have that, and you'll have that in your packet, certifying that the board unanimously, well, not unanimously, but...
Yeah, and the reason I asked the question is because anybody can put together a statement that says, hey, we discussed this. Anybody can do that. But if you have minutes reflecting a vote as an action item, and it states who voted yes or who voted no, very much like we function here, now people have to be accountable for their vote, and as a result, the organization will be accountable. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ready to make a motion? Oh, before we get there, can we talk about the application deadline and how they can obtain the application online and when the application would be available online? I mean, I know that we don't have a definite date, but they can probably look into an upcoming month.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, for reminding me about that. Yes, the application is poised to go out on November 18th. That's, I believe, a Thursday or Friday. It will be on the City of Glendale's website at the Parks Department under the CDBG section, and it will be due December 22nd, 2011.
Wow.
And it's a very short time frame, but we know that
That's
agencies...
good. They get it done before Christmas. They
Yes.
can go have a good holiday.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly not their busy time, but we know. But there's actually a sample of applications now on the web from last year, and certainly agencies can begin looking at that application and some of the requirements for that, so that begin developing an idea of what to apply for. It's certainly there'll be less money, but an idea of what is required would be an application that's there from last year. We can't publish the RFP yet until the City Council approves this on November 15th, but right now, under the City of Glendale's Parks Department website, under the CDBG section, there is the last year's proposal and last year's application. And I do want to make just one more remark, because we talked about the RFP for social services, but I did want to mention for the capital, we do have some significant changes in that proposal as well. Again, those were recommendations made by the committee and the council to tighten up the requirements for soliciting RFPs for the agencies. And again, one of those requirements is certainly the financial statements from the applicants, so that anybody applying for those improvement funds would have to follow some of the same guidelines as far as 2 years of financial statements. Again, it's to make sure an agency receiving improvement funds, which certainly are most of the times more significant dollar amounts, are solid and are doing their financial statements, and again, the board is approving of those in the minutes of their annual financial statements. The other requirements are going to be that and I put that in the RFP, is agencies will no longer be able to receive CDBG funds for some of their soft costs, which we call pre-development costs, such as building permit, architectural fees, consultant fees, engineering fees. These will only be utilized, CDBG funds would only be utilized for the hard cost of construction with a general contractor, so that we don't have any funds used and then the project not going through. So that's a very significant change. We've also began to look at the equity, of course, in the properties and making sure that there's enough equity and there's the liens, or if there are liens, to look at what's out there, making sure there's a clean property. Even though they may have seconds on the property, so as long as there's enough equity to pay back in case there's a problem. So all that is discussed in the RFP. We certainly want to make sure that anybody that's leasing property that's applying for funds, that we are able to provide a deed of trust or a lien on that owner's property or a property owned by that nonprofit. So certainly a lot of more protection for the city, and I think most of our agencies would not have any significant impact on them. It would just be, as we do now, this all is being implemented this fiscal year. So far, we haven't had any questions or any issues. They're all understanding. They all know this is certainly to their benefit as well. So, but for the new agencies that may be applying, they need to know that there are liens on their properties, there are requirements for financial statements, and that we wouldn't be paying any soft costs. So they get an idea of if they need a lot of architectural work, and sometimes it could be $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 at least, that they're going to have to come up with that funds themselves.
You also mentioned permits. That's also included in the soft cost?
Yes, Mr. Olivares, yeah, the building permit and the plan check is a soft cost. The only permits that would be paid are those during construction with maybe, let's say it's a plumbing permit or another permit that's after construction starts. Those would be eligible, but all pre-construction items would be not allowed, and there'll be kind of an in-kind contribution by the agencies.
What if an agency came with a proposal where they pay all of the pre-development costs, build them into the budget, and only expect to get them back if the project is finished? Not an option.
You're giving ideas.
No, well, I'm only asking because I know that happens in the public sector at the state level and at the federal level. And it's a way for a nonprofit to risk the funds up front, knowing that unless they complete the project, they won't get it back. But it also tells them that, hey, if you're willing to spend this money and you finish the project, you will be reimbursed for it out of the overall budget. So I didn't know if that was ever even discussed at the council level.
Mr. Olivares, I don't think that was discussed right now. It was again, we had some reviews by our internal audit section. That wasn't discussed. I mean, that's certainly an option later on. We've been pretty lucky that most of our agencies have been able to cover the cost of the permanent plan check. It does get, for larger projects, very expensive, but that's certainly an option that could be looked at if it's a hardship for some of the agencies, that we would, again, on the back end, say if they pay for the front and everything's completed, they would have a chance to get reimbursed for the building permits.
And when I say that, I've seen it happen in many different scales of projects and so on, but the reimbursement doesn't take place until after a COO has been completed and people have actually moved in, and not at the beginning of construction, because we would still be running the same risk that the project's not completed and then you're dispersing funds. But clearly that's not on our paperwork at the moment.
Correct.
Just so we're all clear. Yeah.
Just again, Mr. Olivares and members of the committee, again, we're I don't want to use the word experimenting, but we're working with this to see how and if it's maybe a lot of hardship cases and situations, but so far we haven't had the situation there. Maybe by larger projects that might happen, but given the funding that we have right now, it seems unlikely that maybe bigger projects will be coming up. And those that are big projects, that probably would be contributing dollars for the pre-construction. But again, it is certainly being reviewed, and we're going to see for the next 2 years how this all works out.
See, that also brings to mind, and I always think about, I try to think of pre-designated projects as though we were doing them in the private sector. So if we're going to speak that way, then if we have a park project in the city has a lot of leverage, obviously, but how are permits and how is all that being handled? We're just saying, okay, we're going to allocate $700,000 for park projects this year, or whatever number that is. But we never really get to see how that's all handled, that kind of detail. And this is why I keep bringing this up, because to me, if that's the way we're going to go, then we want to treat everybody the same way. We want to make sure that we all look at the project the same way, and we arrange for the cost and the pre-development cost and all of that gets handled the same way. And we just want to see it consistently across, at least I do, across the board.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to follow up with Mr. Oliveros, what he said. Does it matter on the permit fees if the permit is taken out by one of our vendors that will be successful in the bidding process and that's working on a city project, say, compared to a private matter? Do the fees vary? Because I know just recently, in light of the budget that we're going through, that the building department, as well as Mr. Zern's Department of Public Works, have raised the fees for permit purposes. So I didn't know if there is a variation there between when the vendor works on a city project compared to that maybe of a private.
Mr. Cornell, no, there's no difference in the fees paid by a city project or a private project. It's all based on the estimated value, so the process is the same.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to go over here. I was looking here and what the chair mentioned. As far as I recollect, you've always had this online, as well as other means of advertising as well. But you've always had this, so this is not the first time that you're doing it this time around, is it, for the online advertising?
Mr. Cornell, no, we've been doing this for a number of years now. And of course, the technology is there now for the web, but if you remember years ago, we did have just written hard copies. But no, we've been doing this for a number of years now as far as the technology goes. And
I wanted to go on page 3 of the request for the social services here and for the pre-bid meetings. Since the RFPs are due on December 22nd, and the last workshop is December 14th, and it's during the holidays, my recommendation that we move up this second workshop and pre-bid conference maybe 1 week, because you're getting there and there's about a 3-week difference here, and you're getting in the heart of the holiday season, and then it's going to only be about 7 days prior after that last pre-bid conference before the RFPs are due. So this member perhaps would like to make a recommendation to have you look at the feasibility and maybe have a conference on this among staff about possibly working this second pre-bid conference maybe up 1 week.
Now, Mr. Carrillo, I believe this second meeting would probably, at this point, those who are interested in applying would be coming back after his first meeting. So the questions, I would imagine, are a little bit more detailed, more specific, not necessarily all-encompassing. Would that be correct?
correct. Make a note of that.
And on these pre-bid conferences, you're going over everything that we discussed, and you mentioned about the new guidelines and so on for the financials and whatnot that we went over. So all this is mentioned, I assume, that's going to be mentioned in these pre-bid conferences then.
Yes, Mr. Cornell, correct. We review the RFP in detail and the applications as well. And we do, get a lot of questions, but we go through every question on the application so the agencies know what exactly to answer the questions directly and how to present themselves as far as the committee. So some do not know they need to come to the advisory committee. So we let them know that there is an interview, which helps them again to prepare for that interview. So there are a lot of things that we do besides just the questions on this.
And Mr. Correa, I would like to emphasize that the applications that do not have financial statements attached, 2 years financial statements attached, would be automatically disqualified, correct?
Correct. We do have agencies that may be missing a page or something. There may be some leeway there, but most of the times, I think most our agencies are able to provide those financial statements. It's, again, the new ones that we're certainly want to educate any new nonprofits, either from Glendale they're developing or outside, to have those statements, because if they're not able to, they will be disqualified, prohibited from applying for CDBG.
And I think what we're trying to express here is that we had this come up last year, and we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we're interviewing somebody and then we're waiting for them to go back to the office and fax in something while we're in the middle of trying to make decisions. So if you don't have a 100% complete application, then you will not be considered, and it will not be submitted to the committee for review.
And going back to community need assessment survey, is this posted online? Is this something that applicants can see? Because I would like to recommend to have the need assessment also posted where, organizations can really see where the concerns are. And if you're not within our need, the chances for your application to be approved is really not that great. So we want to make sure that the applications are staying within the needs of the community. Because anyways, this is to help the community.
Yeah, Madam Chair, absolutely, that's a great idea to have that posted, and maybe the link from
From the
RFP
application.
can go to the needs assessment so they see in detail. That's a very good
And this also will
suggestion.
give them a direction
Correct.
as to what is our, areas of concern.
Mr. Olivares, Mr. Carrillo, I think what Mr. Olivares was mentioning, it happened in 09, 010, a funding basis, where we had a vendor, and it turned out this was a first-time vendor, and which was good because we always like to see new faces, new blood. Came in and submitted this, and as a result, when it came down to be able to verify everything, which we did, turned out that this vendor regretfully did not make the mandatory meeting, and as a result was not a valid bid at that time. But that's why we were waiting, and I think when we checked to verify all this, we found this out. So I could see where you can like to emphasize at these meetings, especially how important it is that attendance is mostly required, especially the mandatory one, because it's a make or break. If they don't follow the rules and guidelines as you have outlined in the RFP and are not followed, that all this hard work and time and effort and energy is regretfully going down the drain. It doesn't have to if they attend these sessions, particularly the mandatory one, to see what is required, because they think, hey, the city, it's a piece of cake, and that just let me get at it, and this is what happens. So I'm happy that you're emphasizing this and going over these, particularly these new rules and guidelines on the financial, because it's so important. so we can have all these new vendors participate in this and not find out at the end that this is what's going to happen.
Yeah. With that, I'd like to move item 4C.
And I'll second it.
Committee members Cornell,
Yes.
Vanessian is absent, Olivares,
Yes.
Ananian is absent, Chair Markarian.
Yes. Next item?
Next item 5, public communications. I don't have any cards.
I don't have any.
Item 6,
Our
adjournment.
audience doesn't want to speak today. Okay.
Yes.
Madam Chair, if I may just make an announcement, and I think this is part of your project too. The second annual Glendale Health Festival
Yes.
will be held on Saturday, November 5th, 2011, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Pacific Community Center. That's on Pacific and Riverdale here in Glendale. And it is certainly a great event for providing not only the education from the medical community, and we talked about how that's been a high need in the community, but it also, there's food, entertainment, activities, the major sponsors being, the Glendale Adventist Medical Center and Glendale Memorial, but certainly there's a lot of participation from the community, and so we wanted to encourage our community to come, our residents to participate in this event. It is free. There is no sign up per se. You show up as you wish from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. on Saturday, November 5th.
Yes, and this is for the entire family. Feel free to bring your children. It is a festival and screenings, health screenings. This year we added the dental component to it, so there will be a dental mobile where actually you will get your, teeth fixed if necessary. We have dentists volunteering their time, so I encourage our community to participate, especially those who do not have insurance and they would like to get screenings and detection testings such as cholesterol check and blood pressure and consulting with our physicians. We have numbers of physicians attending this event, so please come by and stay healthy and be healthy, and let's keep our community very healthy.
Madam Chair, I'd like to thank our two attendees here that are here, both our past vendors, Tim Peters of Door of Hope and Natalie Como of Path to Chief.
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to make a couple of comments, if I may. One, on Sunday we have Unity Fest in Glendale, which our chair as well as myself are part of the organizing committee, so I just want to make sure everybody knows about it. On Brand Boulevard between 12 and 4, and it's free to the public. It's, again, family event, and so it'd be nice to see as many people as we can from our city and our cultures. And then second, I just want to say, I truly also want to express my condolences to Larry Serian's family. I was lucky enough to be in a couple of projects over the years with him, one including the Veterans Memorial and a couple of other things along the city. And you always saw that passion in Larry, and it's something that hopefully we all got a little bit from. And so anyway, I want to express my thoughts to the family. Thank you.
Thank you. He's in our thoughts and prayers. Thank you. I think it's adjourned.